America, my name is Osei-Frimpong, and today we're going to talk about making the Democratic Party relevant. I'm a Democrat for the reasons that most black people are Democrats, not because we believe some deep theory of democratic government, but because the Republicans are the more offensive racists. So I'm a Democrat because I'm siding with the less offensive racists. But make no mistake, they're still racist. But that's not a thing. That's not what was. So I need to actually get my party up in their weight so that they could actually be relevant. Because right now I'm in the South, I'm in the middle of Georgia. Democrats like to think they're relevant, but they're not relevant. You're not relevant. You're not relevant, and there's one reason why you're not relevant. You don't know how to talk about freedom. You're not relevant because you don't know how to talk about freedom. You think government's about caring people and being the more caring party or the less rude party. It doesn't matter about grabbing women in the crotch if you could talk about freedom. And that's how Trump won. And not just Trump. If you're talking about everything else except freedom, you have a problem. And I say this because one of my friends went to the state Democratic convention a few weeks ago, and there was 40 plus speakers who spoke. Not one of them mentioned the word freedom. One of them did say the word justice, and they just said the word. There wasn't no worked out plan for what that means, but they said the word racial justice and the same thing, and then went to go talk about something else. I don't know, global warming or something. But you can't do politics in America without talking about freedom. Democrats can't talk about freedom. I'm going to help Democrats talk about freedom and tie it to policies. Because when Rush Limbaugh talks, he doesn't go a half hour without saying the word freedom. Sean Hannity can't go 15 minutes without saying the word freedom. I can tell you on Fox News, as I've been doing this broadcast for the last, 2-3 minutes, they've already mentioned the word freedom. Because politics is about freedom. If you make it about an emotional backlash and drilling down the principles of freedom, and you make it about an emotional backlash, you aren't actually doing politics. You're just playing. You're playing. So even the Republicans, insofar as they even do it poorly, they're talking about freedom, so they're actually doing the job. America wasn't founded on the principles of caring. America wasn't founded on the principles of better and worse manners. It was about freedom. And so unless you're talking about freedom and can draw your policies to freedom articulately and quickly, you're losing. You're not even doing politics. And I'll tell you right now, if you're a Democrat in Georgia, your job isn't necessarily to win elections. It's to actually change the electorate. So you can talk about turnout, and you can talk about, going over and wooing moderates or whatever. But it doesn't matter. The job is changing them and making lifelong Democrats because they have a deeper understanding of freedom. Right? So with that in mind, Matthew, can you hit the opening?
To the beat, y'all.
Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I'll paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front.
All right, my associate producer, Sin, just actually figured out why most black people are Democrats.
Yeah, I became a Democrat less than a month ago because I can't convince my family to come out of this burning house. So I figure I might as well go back in and try to put the fire out.
Yes.
They just won't leave. They are diehard. I say bad things about Kamala Harris, and it's on.
Yeah. So we're in a burning house, and we can't convince everyone. And I don't want to forsake my family.
Yeah. You don't want to abandon them. You're looking at the house, you're like,
I like black communities. Black people are Democrats, so we can't. So we can't abandon them. But we're gonna have to make the party relevant. And we make the party relevant by teaching people how to talk about their policies in terms of freedom. You have to understand that, look, even your dumbest Republicans, they talk about freedom, just not very well, right? When they're talking about religious choice, they're talking about freedom. When they're talking about school choice, they're talking about freedom. When they're talking about lower taxes, it's because they want to spend their money the way they want to. They don't want the government taking their money. So they're really talking about freedom. And when they're talking about small government, it's because they think that with a smaller government, I'll be more free. I'll get to spend my money the way I want to. I'll be more free. We drinking leaded water. But I'll be free. So they're talking about all of these things, and you don't think they're talking about freedom? They're talking about freedom. And I'll be honest, the biggest problem, it's called the social question in 19th century political theory, 19th, 20th century political theory. It's called the social question. How can you be free and still be under some man's dime? Right? How can you be free and employed by somebody else at the same time? That's the question that the Republicans have an answer to. It's not a very good answer, but the Democrats can't have a better answer, because that's the problem with freedom today. And so you better believe when they're talking about these immigrants are coming to take our jobs, that's when the Republicans are saying that, they're talking about freedom because they want power on the job, because if you don't have power on the job, you're not really free. If you don't have a job, you can't spend money, and if you can't spend money, you can't be in civil society. America's got a 2-drink minimum, and if Sin just shook his head, it might be more than 2 drinks. They want 2 drinks and a cover charge. America's got 2 drinks and a cover charge, and black people, we can't pay any of it. And white people, if they can't pay enough for 2 drinks, their cover charge, and for their friends, they're ready to burn the whole bar down. We need a little bit of that. So, America, you need money in order to play in America. And insofar as you don't have money, you're not free. And that's how we need to talk about democratic policies, because Republicans draw this down to freedom, and that's the right way to do it. Even healthcare policy. You're like, what does healthcare policy have to do with freedom? Look, you're mad when you get sick, but your anger isn't political till you look at your healthcare bill. And that's when your anger gets political and your resentment gets real. You're like, why am I paying $4,000 for a test? This is BS, and you're ready to, even the test comes back positive, the test comes back negative. There's a political type of anger that comes when you get the bill for that test. And insofar as you're mad that, you're sick, it's only because as a matter of freedom. It's because, now that you're sick, you don't get you hurt your shoulder, so you don't get to do the things you wanted to do. So it's all about freedom, just being able to externalize your will. And you're mad about that bill because now I got to work 2 months of my life just to pay off my healthcare bill. Not use my money to do what I want to do, but to pay off my healthcare bill. So being sick isn't all that bad. I mean, being sick sucks. But if we actually cared about that, people would make different decisions about their life. like Americans don't care about, the illness is bad, but having that illness take away your freedom is unconscionable. And that's the political anger. You have to understand that that's what's going on. Like I said, if we actually cared about being healthy, there would be kind of different cultures. But we care about doing what we want. And so sometimes it makes us sick, but we shouldn't get punished for being sick. So America's about freedom. Democratic candidates have to talk in terms of freedom. One of the biggest issues we have that threatens our freedom is how we relate to our jobs, because how can you be both free and employed at the same time? Nobody has a real answer to that. I mean, I do. You need independent security in your job, which means you don't go to the HR person when you have a problem, because that person's not independent. That HR person is not there for your grievance. They're there to quietly take notes so that when and if you become a problem, they can get you to quit. So, so you need independent support on the job. That means you need a union to secure your independence on the job so you can both work your job and be free and not have your freedom be curtailed by your employment. Because if you're not free if you're broke, and you're not free if you're working for someone who doesn't let you, who treats you like a slave, right? So you don't want to be slave to your employment, and that's why employment rights are important. You don't want to be slave to health. Nobody wants to be a slave to health or health care, right? I don't want to spend all my life being healthy for the sake of being healthy. And so when they put me on the ground, they'll say, well, he was real healthy until he died. He lived a long life. No, that's not why we live. We don't live to live long. We live to do things, and sometimes things take time, so we need a long life in order to do all the things we need to do. But we don't live in order for the sake of living. Not anybody who actually cares. And we certainly don't send people over to die for the sake of living. Like, we don't send people to war for the sake of living. We send people to war for freedom. So Democrats need to be able to talk about freedom. Yeah, we send people to war, saying, well, the money thing. Oil, right? So we send people to war for oil, but then the oil, we make money, so we could spend money the way we want to spend it. Like civil society, that's our market-based volunteer organizations, civil society. Those are an extension and the way we express and enable our freedom, and we need money to participate in those civil societies. Speaking of money, if you like what I'm doing, you need to go to thefunkyacademic.com and say, you know what, that's a useful Negro. I'm gonna donate $5 a month, $15 a month, $50 a month in order to keep what he's doing, because I'm telling you the truth every week, and I'm doing so in a way that, depending on who you talk to, might make me unemployable. So I'm gonna need you, my loyal viewers, and people who should be my loyal viewers, to go over to thefunkyacademic.com, sign up for a $5, $15, or $50 a month membership, and keep me doing what I'm doing. Because what I'm doing is important. I'm trying to make our community whole, and I'm trying to do it through the only way it can be done in these America, and that's through political education, political advocacy, and organizing. That takes money. I'd like to grow, but I also have to keep the lights on, and I'd like to pay my people. So go to thefunkyacademic.com and sign up for a membership. Because I'm the one saying that the Democratic Party, the problem with the Democratic Party is one, they don't take creating electorate seriously. They think they can just kind of energize the one that's laying on the ground, when I'm saying the one that's laying on the ground is Republican. The one that's laying on the ground is Republican and alienated. So it doesn't matter. You need to create electorates. Real political leaders create electorates. They don't just cater to the ones that happen to be laying around. They create electorates. They create lifelong electorates. They create generational electorates. And honestly, Democrats, that means we might have to lose a few elections. There are going to be a lot of losses in 2018. But there's a way to lose that creates an electorate, and there's a way to lose that just like keeps everyone confused and wastes everyone's time. Which is pretty much the way the Democrats have been losing since they were racist. The Democrats won in the South when they were racist, and then when they kind of decided to like quasi give up the racism, the Democrats won in the South when they were racist. Now when they quasi gave up the racism, they lose in a way that's just confusing, right? So like I want Democrats to start in 2018 at least lose in a way that's not confusing, and then in 2020 actually win and govern. Because there are going to be a lot of losses, people are going to, they call me names for just foreseeing this. But unless you change the electorate, there's no amount of energizing that's going to do it. You need to actually change them. And to change them, you need to actually make people uncomfortable. And when you make people uncomfortable, you might lose in the short term. But then you win in 2020, right? Or you could try to win by making everyone comfortable in the short term, and then you lose because this is Georgia and people are Republican or conservative, and then you'll continue to lose because you'll be confused from 2018 to 2020. So what Democrats need to do, number one, is take the business of changing electorates seriously, not just catering to the ones that are left around or energizing the ones that are left around. Take that seriously. Two, talk about freedom and draw all of your policies to freedom. Nobody became a lifelong Democrat because of John Ossoff. Like, nobody became a lifelong Democrat because, exactly. Like, nobody becomes a lifelong Democrat because of... The only reason they're lifelong John Lewis Democrats is because, like, John Lewis used to talk about freedom. Like, no one became a John Lewis Democrat because they saw what he did from, like, 1986 on when he was elected. Because in 1986, all he did was throw Julian Bond under the bus. But that's another story. I'm just saying, don't ask me to pick between Julian Bond and John Lewis because you'll get your feelings hurt. I'm going with Julian Bond.
Almost happened to do it at the convention. I was like,
oh.
I'm not voting for Obama to get nothing.
No, I'm not voting for it.
There will be one day in this room, you'll be right here. I'm sitting between two old black ladies, like, I'm going to get my ass whooped.
Yeah, I know. You're in Georgia. You say bad things about John Lewis, and you take your life into your own hands. However, I'm saying it. He hasn't been putting it on the line for us. He's been putting it on the line for other people. but not us. And that's a problem for at least me. So back when he was getting his head bashed in for fighting for freedom, John Lewis was cool. But ever since he stopped talking about freedom, started talking about bootstraps, I don't need him in my political life. So I need Democratic politicians, if they're going to be relevant, might lose in the short term. Like, you're going to lose in the short term anyway in places like Georgia. And the way you prostitute yourself out to try to win and then lose, it's just embarrassing. And so you're setting yourself for always be losing. Because guess what? The Republicans are not tired of the winning. So you need to talk about freedom and draw your policies to freedom. And if you can't talk about freedom, then you don't know enough to ask for anyone's vote. If you can't tie healthcare policy to freedom, if you only tie it to health, then you're going to lose to the person who ties sinning to freedom. Like you'll tie like the people who want to do what they want and don't care about healthcare policy, they'll tie it to freedom. They'll tie licentiousness to freedom. Even like Republicans may or may not be smart or dumb or whatever, but they can all, even your like simplest Republican will talk about freedom insofar as they talk about politics, and they'll do so quickly. Democrats will talk about all sorts of things. They'll talk about caring. They'll talk about Trump's manners. They'll talk about Russia. They won't talk about freedom. Once again, I bet you Sean Hannity has already said the word freedom, like in the last 4 minutes. Because it all comes down to freedom. And unless you can talk about jobs in terms of freedom, both freedom on the job and the freedom money provides, money and land, you can't just talk about land without talking about freedom. When Republicans talk about property, they talk about property rights. And that's just freedom. Rights are simply freedom externalized. Freedom that's recognized by other people. You don't have property rights because you can defend your property with your gun. You have property rights because they're recognized by other people, so you don't have to defend it with your gun. And then you have gun rights, so in a pinch, you can defend it with your gun. You can defend your freedom with your gun. So Republicans know this. We just need to talk about democratic policies in terms of rights. We need to talk about employment in terms of rights, right? It used to be the case that like women were the property of their husbands. That was a problem. And you know what? We came up with family rights so that everyone has equal opportunity to be people in a marriage. And it wasn't just like you became property of somebody else. It was a matter of rights. Everyone had rights. So we understood family rights because we understood that women had freedom too. And property rights were just, we understood that people had freedom. So in order for freedom to be externalized, we needed a scheme to recognize people's claim over things, including their body, but also their stuff that they had in their possessions. And so we made property rights. None of these things are set down, from on high, because we also have eminent domain. When like your property rights start to screw up other people's freedom, we have to take away your property. And we don't let you do everything to your land. You can't dump toxic sludge because that screws up other people's freedom, including the people you might want to sell the land to, or like the people whose water passes through underground on your land. So rights are only rights, even property rights, insofar as they support freedom. So if we're serious about supporting freedom, we need not just property rights, but we need family rights. We need so that like a dependent spouse isn't left without, doesn't stay in an abusive marriage because they married a meal ticket. Or and we need employment rights because when you become an employee, you don't become a slave, you become an employee, which means that you're still a person. And so we need employment rights. That means a way to exercise your freedom as an employee externally. And we need those rights to be recognized by all of the governing bodies. And we need them to be secured, not necessarily by your employer, because your employer has their own interests. We need them independently secured by an independent union, right? As a matter of freedom. If we care about employees being free, we need to talk about unions. If we care about spouses being free, we need to talk about family rights. If we care about people being free, we need to talk about rights. And insofar as Democrats don't know how to talk about rights and freedom, they will always lose. Because if you talk about caring, what happens when I stop caring? When I stop feeling? That's like talking about marriage, not in terms of rights, but in terms of like love. You know what happens? Sometimes, like, you know, I get wrinkles. Sometimes, well, it's like talking about marriage, not in terms of vows, but in terms of feelings. That's democratic politics. We think we can do politics in terms of feelings, not vows. Whereas the Republicans are like talking about like, all right, so I need you to pledge this and blah, 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 blah. They talk about the pledge. So what happens when the thrill is gone? Then your marriage is gone, and Democratic marriage. Republicans are like, no, we're going to stay and we're going to get this, do this. So we need to talk about freedom. And even insofar as we do it in the abortion, debate, we do it at the most formal, flimsy level, right? The choice between whether to abort a child or to carry it to term, rather than like giving content to freedom and making that choice actually mean something by saying like, look, before I'm coerced into this choice, we need to talk about public child care. We need to talk about maternity and paternity leave. And just, since the businesses aren't going to provide it, we need to just make it mandatory so that all businesses have to provide it, so that a business that provides it doesn't get comparative disadvantage. We need to talk about guaranteed jobs so that if I get let go for having a kid, I can walk into another job. So having a kid doesn't become a penalty for my freedom, right? We need to talk about reproductive rights in terms of freedom, not just a choice between whether to terminate a child, a fetus, or to bring it to term. Like, that's the worst way to talk about abortion politics. So we need to talk about childcare. We need to talk about jobs. We need to talk about all the ways in which we punish people for having kids, pretty much. And then on top of that, we need to talk about birth control. And then on top of that, we can talk about abortion. But it needs to be one of a suite of policies. So honestly, anybody, and I'm talking about, there are a lot of feminists who follow this, and they're going to get all in their feelings when I say this. Any person's abortion, whose reproductive politics is centered on abortion, doesn't actually understand what's going on. And this is a man telling this to you. If your reproduction politics is centered on abortion, you don't understand freedom in reproduction. Because it's just pretty much damning women to like an awful choice and calling that freedom. So you have a very ignorant and shallow understanding of freedom, and like you need to do some other reading. So Republicans, much better at talking about freedom, and they're not scared of saying freedom. Neither were the Founding Fathers, neither were a lot of Americans who care about America. Democrats, scared to talk about freedom, don't even know what to do with justice. By the way, justice is just wholeness. It's just what do we do to keep situations whole? That means in a just society, one person doesn't gain by another person's exploitation. There's no, in a just society, a rising tide does lift all boats. Right now, we don't live in a just society, so a rising tide gets some people to momentum to crash into our boat and take our stuff. They're using the tide to pirate our boat. So that's not a just, that's an unjust system. A just system, a rising tide, does lift all boats because it's a whole system and one person doesn't profit from another person's exploitation, right? So that's a quick thing about justice, but this is about freedom. And freedom in civil society means being able to have the money to actually participate in civil society and like have a source of income or inherited wealth or baby bonds, whatever. And then also have those rights to, whatever one buys or joins, be respected and codified. So healthcare policy that's premised on freedom and not merely health, because remember, people fight and die for freedom. They don't fight and die for health, or they wouldn't fight and die. Is one that understands the problem with illness is that that it's debilitating. It doesn't let you do the things you want to do, like live without pain. And then the problem with healthcare politics is that it forces you're being coerced, you become a slave to health and then a slave to your health bill. It forces you to work time in your life in slavery, in bondage to this health bill. That's the problem with healthcare politics. Instead, I should be able to work, earn money, and spend money in a way that expresses my free will. Now, my free will isn't always rational. The reason doesn't always have to do with freedom. That's why reason tells me that 2 + 2 = 4, whether I choose it or not. Right? So, like, my free will isn't always rational. But I should have. But insofar as I am a free person, I need to be able to choose whether or not I use my money to go play, the dice, get the hot hand, or whether I use it in a more rational scheme. I should have that choice. And having a healthcare bill that coerces me to paying Aetna rather than, I say Aetna because Aetna is one of those companies that in the South made money off of slaves. They insured everything, including slaves. Aetna owes us reparations. So I'm going to keep saying Aetna. I think Aetna might have changed. The chat will tell me. Aetna probably, I think Aetna got swallowed up. But anyway, whatever conglomerate Aetna used to be a part of, they owe black people checks because they made money off of insuring black people because we were property. And being responsible slave owners for their property, they insured their property with Aetna. I think New York Life, too. So you need to draw down healthcare policy, not for the sake of health, but for the sake of freedom. You need to draw down employment policy, not for the sake of working, but for the sake of freedom, because that's why we work, to participate in a scheme that, like, we also get to, like, buy things in and start companies and clubs and tithe. Like, that's why we work, in order to express our will. Our will can be rational, or will sometimes not the most rational, but like we're free in doing it. That's the freedom that's promulgated, and Republicans can talk about it because one, they put money behind people like the Republican version of me, and the Republican version of me is a guy named Milton Friedman. Give me a picture of Milton Friedman. All right, so Milton Friedman is a Chicago-style economist who spent his whole decade. He wrote a book called, I want to say, Capitalism and Freedom?
I believe so.
Is it Capitalism and Freedom?
Yeah.
Capitalism and Freedom. I read the section on desegregation. He thinks that the market will desegregate because it will become inefficient. Guess what? White people pay for segregation. Like, they don't go to their private schools because, like, they actually think their kids are going to learn more. They pay for the whiteness. So the private market will never desegregate. But he wrote his book, Capitalism and Freedom. The private market will never desegregate. Even if they will use their money and pay the tax to stay away from black people. Yes, the private market will not absorb stigmatized communities at fair wages or you don't understand how race and honor work. Yeah, they'll spend money because money's less important than their whiteness. They'll throw money to keep their whiteness. So he wrote an entire book on capitalism and freedom and how, if we just open up markets, people will be more free and that'll get rid of some of the justice issues we have. But it's never how private markets work. But he did that. People paid for him to do that, just like I think that you should be paying for me to do what I do. And then it was published, and then now it's in university curriculums, and then people donated money to universities on the condition that they'll teach this book and teach Friedman. And he went to Argentina, bankrupted Argentina. So he spent all of that money convincing people that markets will promote freedom. And it worked. And now, people just think that markets promote freedom in an uncomplicated way. Markets do promote freedom, but in a complicated way. So you think you can play baseball without, I was going to say designated hitter, but designated hitter is a very complicated metaphor. People feel, I think, justifiably on both sides on the designated hitter rule. But, so I was about to say, people are more free with designated hitters because it frees pitchers to just worry about pitching without actually hitting. But I think it might corrupt the game in a way. People can't say it corrupts the game, and I'm sympathetic. So I'm going to go for a more geeky rule. The infield fly rule. I'm not going to explain the infield fly rule. I'm going to tell the people at home know what I'm talking about, and the people who don't. But the infield fly rule is a rule that seems like it's extra, so the baseball libertarians will say that it doesn't matter, but it actually balances the power between infielders and base runners, right? So it seems extra, but it actually balances power. So libertarians and markets don't want all these extra rules like unions, but it actually balances power in markets so that so baseball can be played without the infield fly rule, but then there's an unequal power dynamic between infielders and base runners. Markets can be operated without, say, unions or without child labor laws, but then there's an inappropriate balance between employers and employees, rendering them functionally slaves. So, Friedman spent all of his time convincing Americans and the worldwide, even Argentinians. Didn't work out so well in Argentina, but he spent his time convincing them the markets simpliciter, without qualifications, promote freedom. I'm saying markets with qualifications promotes freedom because markets create a certain set of problems that have to do with their fickleness, that they create externalities that they don't quite absorb. And so, like, if you're a beeper salesman in 1996, the market was not your friend. Although, like, it trained you to become a beeper producer, manufacturer, but the market's gonna move faster than your payment, your mortgage payment. So you'll get stuck. We need supports to make the markets not be predatory. All right, so the markets enable freedom, but they also create a certain set of problems because they're so fickle. They move faster. First of all, they're structurally biased against people who aren't of the landowning ethnicity. That's us, because we don't own a lot of land, or capital. But then even when they're working, they are still too fickle for employment concerns, which means you'll always be a little bit too scared to lose your job, so you won't do other things with the money you get for your job, like, for example, have a mortgage, because you don't know if your job's going to be there for the length of your mortgage. So you need supports so that markets, the problems markets create get absorbed, so that we can have markets, so that I can have my 11 different types of bread at Kroger, and that I can have Kroger. I like Kroger. I want markets. I want Kroger. I want to be able to choose things in my life. I want to be able to choose which clubs I join and all that stuff. I just don't want to be a slave to it, right? So anybody who says markets are the problem, they don't quite understand freedom, because I don't want to be in the field threshing grain and then, like, making my own bread. I want the market to take care of that, and I just buy it. So markets are good. Unfettered markets are bad. Baseball's good. Baseball without the infield fly rule, bad. Designated hitter, complicated. So Friedman spent all of his time creating the quality of electorate that has an uncomplicated relationship with freedom in the markets. This other guy, Buchanan, give me a picture of Buchanan. He spent his entire life, and these are both very successful guys, just you don't know about them because they were too busy working you. They weren't about self-promotion. Friedman a little bit more than Buchanan. They were about making sure that you spoke their ideas without even knowing that you were speaking their ideas. There's a great book that came out that centers on Buchanan called Democracy in Chains. And Buchanan spent his entire life getting you and convincing you to think that the government is the problem. That the government always bad. Friedman spent his life telling you that markets were good. Wait. Okay. Yeah. Friedman spent his time getting you to think that markets are good. Buchanan spent his time, and he had institutes and, like, an entire, like, had Goldwater's ear, because a lot of you think that you're Goldwater Republicans or libertarians because of Goldwater, but, like, you're libertarians because this guy Buchanan was talking to Goldwater and talking to Reagan. And he's the one who got you to think that government's always bad, that you never need the influence fly rule, even though that would actually balance power. Like, he's the one, this guy Buchanan, this great book, Democracy in Chains, goes right at it about like Buchanan's ideological power. Because you have to understand that even if you don't have an interest in politics, politics has an interest in you. They need you to vote and think a certain way. Right? So the idea that Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, and in Athens, Tim Bryant, there's an entire radio station that's devoted to convincing people that freedom looks a certain way and that there's no real democratic alternative that talks about freedom in a deeper way. Why you need the infield fly rule, for example, in baseball. And why you need unions to actually enable freedom so that employees aren't slaves. And why you need healthcare policy that actually makes people not slaves to either health or health care. I mean, health is fine, but it's not worth voting, fighting, and dying for. Not being a slave to health is worth voting, fighting, and dying for. And that and healthcare policy will make us not a slave to health. That's why it's important. Nobody wants to be a slave to Aetna. I mean, it's sad that I broke my arm or whatever, but once I get that cast bill, that's when I get political. Turning over chairs, and I'll break the other arm on someone else's jaw if I have to get this health bill down. So you have to understand that politics is about freedom. And political resentment is about freedom and how other people are using their power to extract our freedom. And until Democrats are doing that, they'll just stay losing. Or if they win, it'll be a fluke win until the passions run down and then the electorate goes Republican again because Republicans are talking about freedom. And they have the ideological power and the arguments, and they put the money behind the arguments, and you should be putting money behind me to actually make the arguments instead of putting it at the Breakfast Club. You know what they don't talk about at the Breakfast Club? Freedom. So all you black people watching the Breakfast Club, I don't know. Charlemagne the God really help you understand freedom better? And insofar as they're doing it, are they doing it in a way that makes you probably more Republican? So thank you for your time. I'm going to go because I want people to be able to watch this in their class. And so if it's an hour-long class, I want to keep this at about 45 minutes, and then you can have your discussion. So I want you to email it to your people. Put this in your Sunday school, your book club, because you didn't read the book. And then talk about this instead. That's fine. It's not fine. You maybe, depending on the book, should read the book, but you should talk about this possibly instead of reading, pretending to read the book that you're pretending to read. So thank you for your time. Matthew did a fantastic job. You should go and see Matthew's show. It's on the YouTube channel. It was really good. People don't understand. Matthew's smarter than I am. That's why I picked him. Matthew is smarter than I am. He was the brightest kid in my intro to philosophy class. And so, I recruited him. So if he keeps going, we're talking about Matthew for governor, Matthew for president. And right now, we're just talking about Matthew.
Those would be nice.
Those would be
nice.
And I think you could do the job.
Yeah.
I think you could do the job. Matthew would make an excellent mayor. People are talking about this guy Gillum in Florida. Matthew's better than him. People are talking about Alexander Ocasio-Cortez up in New York. We can get Matthew there. Matthew's as smarter than she is, and as much charisma. But we need to pay Matthew's salary. So in order to do that, I'm going to need you to go to www.thefunkyacademic.com and kick down for a monthly so I can keep doing what I do and we can grow this. Because, we're creating the electorate. I tell you this so that you could talk to all of your friends about this. They're going to be hostile. So, you know what? Next show I'm going to do on psychological barriers to political organizing. That's next week's show. I'll organize it Because yes. All right. So that's next week's show. But this week's show is on how to make the Democratic Party relevant. And that's one, by understanding that your job is to change the electorate that's on the ground, not just organize and not just cater to them. You have to actually change them. Because you understand that Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and all of them, and even Shonda Rhimes, they're working on them, and it's not working on a way that promotes our justice. And two, you do it, you change them by deepening their understanding about freedom. Right? Deepening their understanding about freedom. The fact that you can go to an entire state convention, listen to 40 elected officers, and not have the word freedom come out once is a shame. It's how did you say? It's a shoulda. It's a Rosh Hashanah's coming up, so. But I know a lot of things, so it's a deep mark on the democratic soul. It's a blight. So you need to be able to talk about these issues in terms of freedom and how our freedom and freedom externalized are rights. It's not just when it's in my head that I own this piece of land, that's one thing. When I have a deed to it, it becomes my property right. All right? So rights are just freedom externalized. And for them to be externalized, they have to be universalized. That means everyone has equal opportunity. If it's just an expression of the will that doesn't guarantee equal opportunity, it's just someone's privilege. I get to go here, but you don't. But insofar as it's everyone, it's a right. And insofar as it's a matter of freedom, which everyone should have, it's a right. So, thank you for your time. I'll see you next week, and I hope this was an enjoyable show. Peace.